These trophies of yours, I feel like there should be a Drake song in the background, but these trophies of yours are only trophies for yourself, regardless of your achievements, your losses, your merits or demerits, regardless of any of those. The character that you develop along the course of that journey stays with you forever. That's the thing that really counts.
Hey there, and welcome to the Grad Coach podcast. My name is Derek, and today I'm joined by Dr. Ethar, one of our trusty coaches. And we're going to be talking about a slightly more spicy topic than usual. And that is why your dissertation or thesis, which you've probably been laboring and agonizing over for months, if not years, is perhaps not quite as important as you think, and why that's a good thing. If you're currently working on a dissertation or a thesis, be sure to grab a free copy of our tried and tested dissertation template. You can find that along with loads of other free resources over on the Grad Coach blog, link in the description. So with that out of the way, let's get this party started. Dr. E, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. I know you miss me, but I'm always right here.
Perhaps just a little. So, to kick things off today, let's just quickly provide a little disclaimer here. Obviously, your dissertation, your thesis, your research project is important. It's the final hurdle to completing your degree, and obviously you need to put the effort into it. But what we see very often with the students that we work with is that sometimes students get a little bit lost in terms of losing perspective about what's really important with the dissertation. And so they blow this task up into something so much bigger than it needs to be. And then they start freaking out and they start spinning their wheels and they become obsessive and they become perfectionist about certain things. And then, of course, that just leads to a space of inaction, to a space of procrastination, to a space where no progress is being made. So what we're going to try bring back down to earth today is really just what's important, to bring some perspective to this whole project, this whole process, and help you understand what really matters and what doesn't matter so that you can move forward with your project. So with that little disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about reason number one that your dissertation is not this massive thing that you might think it is. And that is that changing the world is not part of the assessment criteria. Dr. E, what do students need to understand here?
So there's a couple of points here. I'll give you the practical, calm, rational oversight first, seeing as we're doing the disclaimers. Like, let's be calm and rational first and foremost, and we get that out of the way before I lose my mind, because Lord knows I'm going to. So before we get there, it's important to remember, it's part of what we said in previous podcasts. And if you don't know about those previous podcasts, where have you been? Like, go back, go through the list. I haven't been doing all this for nothing. Listen to all the videos. But what we said previously is that the function of your degree really is to get a license. That's really all you're doing. It's the same in that respect as getting a driving license or anything else. So the core assessment criteria for your work isn't whether or not you're going to change the world or whether or not you're going to fundamentally change the way everybody thinks about anything. What it's really about is meeting the actual set down criteria for what you need to do in order for you to get the degree that you're after. Nothing more than that. Nor do your aims need to be set much higher than that. It's a question of what your university requires of you. It's a question of what the passing criteria are. And it's a question of what's demanded of you in terms of the concentration, work, and focus necessary for you to actually produce the thesis, dissertation, whatever else is that you're writing. Setting your sights beyond that, we'll get to that in a second in terms of setting your sights correctly, but setting your sights beyond that tends to function as a distraction. What you really want to do is focus on exactly what's required for your dissertation, for your thesis, for your degree. Lord knows it's difficult enough for you to achieve. So focus all of your attention there and progress step by step.
Yeah, absolutely. I think students get a little tangled by one of the requirements being that you need to make a unique contribution, that you need to solve some sort of unique problem with your research. And this is generally only for PhDs or doctoral level degrees. So this typically doesn't even really apply at a master's level, which is a larger pool of students. And so I think what gets misinterpreted there is the difference between making a unique contribution and making a breakthrough contribution that really changes the way that the industry or the field looks at things. And so it's important to understand that you're not trying to change the world here. You're not trying to win a Nobel Prize. You're not trying to flip the discipline upside down. What your objective is here typically is to find a meaningful research gap that is worth solving, that is worth exploring, and then going and doing the research. And sometimes you're not going to find anything particularly exciting. In fact, most of the times you're probably not going to find anything particularly exciting. And that's okay, because what the assessment criteria are typically something along the lines of, can the student undertake rigorous research in an academic fashion? Can they find a gap and then systematically apply a research design and a methodology to go and solve that gap or fill that gap? And so you really got to keep that in perspective, is that you're not trying to achieve some massive breakthrough. Yeah, you're just trying to make some sort of unique contribution. And again, the degree of that uniqueness will really vary tremendously depending on the level of study. So if it's undergrad or master's or PhD or doctoral, and also from university to university and from discipline to discipline. In some areas, there will be sort of higher expectations, but it is never that you have to change the world with your research.
All right, and now the extra little bit. See, I told you there was a little bit more. I was just waiting for you to, get your information out. I'm just trying to lay the groundwork for you to kind of say what you need to say. Now, I think I don't do nothing for you, my guy. This is it's a dual effort. But look, here, let me let you into a little secret. Shh. It's a quiet little secret between us. You don't need to tell anybody else. This is our little, me, you, everybody watching the podcast. Y'all come closer, right? Let me just explain something to you. A little secret about these academic institutions. They're institutions, which basically means they don't really like change. I mean, they're built on tradition. They're built on practice and protocol and the repetition of those things. Look, there's a philosopher of mine that's why I know, who I really, really quite like. His name is Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault explains precisely this principle, the idea that universities are historical institutions. They base themselves on the repetition and the habit of doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. They're not exactly inclined towards changing things. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't come up with new ideas. That's not to say that you shouldn't, as you said a moment ago, have something of an original contribution, nor should it be the case that you don't think about developing something that might be a paradigm shift. I mean, sometimes the paradigms need shifting, but it's important to remember at all times that paradigm shifts are by definition adversarial. You are shifting from what was the case to what you want to be the case. And therefore, there's naturally going to be a degree of tension between yourself and the institution. So like you said at the opening disclaimer, it's not to say that we shouldn't be aiming high. By all means, aim high, do all of that. But remember that there's a degree of honor in humility. Like, that stuff actually matters. In fact, let me give you a much more important thing for you to remember. Remember that those who end up actually changing the world don't have changing the world as their goal. Those who do have changing the world as their goal, not really that idealistic about the world. I mean, they're not exactly like the nicest human beings in the world. Look, there's a story time. Let me break this down for you in terms of something I've seen before in my own experience, right? So I had this student that I knew one time. We're having a conversation. There was a whole group of people there. It was like, celebratory dinner type thing. And maybe it wasn't exactly the place for me to kind of like break her heart, but I felt like it was necessary. And maybe this isn't the place for us to be breaking your hearts, but I feel like it's necessary. So we were having this conversation about her work, and she was saying that eventually she was going to push through, and she thought she would be perfectly fine in the end, because at the end of the day, she's special. And she felt like she was special because, what she was doing was really, really important. And that was an expression of her specialness, and so on and so forth. And it was, being touched by God and whatever. I don't know. But ultimately, I kind of had to be a Debbie Downer, partly because, all right, I'll confess, it's a little entertaining, and partly because I felt like it was necessary for her to make her way through her studies. And what I said to her was like, all right, but then if you're special, isn't everybody else? She's like, yeah, well, okay, but then if everybody's special, nobody is. And in that manner of speaking, what I'm saying to you is that thinking that you're special is not a prerequisite to doing special things. You're just missing the point. The focus is just in the wrong place. So it's not so much a question of whether or not I think my work is actually going to change the world, or I think my work is paradigm shifting brilliant. No, it's a question of whether or not I committed myself deeply with conviction and certainty to the requirements of my work. And the more bound I am to those parameters, strangely enough, the more impactful my work is going to be. It's that focus. It's making sure your eyes are set in the right place, not on whether or not you think you're actually going to be the leading academic or what have you. That happens as a consequence of what you're doing, or as a consequence of your commitments to your work, not as the goal. So focus in the right direction, you'll be fine.
You'll generally find that you can, or you should be given some form of assessment criteria for your dissertation or your thesis. It's usually some sort of matrix, some sort of spreadsheet that sort of articulates what needs to be achieved. And when you read through that, you find that all of it's rather dry. It's not, changing the world does not feature anywhere there. It's all pretty standard. And so if you're going to align yourself with any set of expectations, let it be that assessment criteria. And of course, there's some interpretive components there, but the bottom line is that's what you need to aim for. Aim for those criteria, let your focus be there, and you'll do just fine. I'm thinking about the anecdote that you shared, and reminds me of a colleague of mine when I was doing my MBA. I recall that for our very, very first assignment, this was like our first assignment. It's the place where you probably want to play it safe, and you probably want to take a narrow focus and increase your probability of earning marks. And this was our first assignment, operations assignment. And to set some context, this was a South African student, and South Africa has been plagued with tremendous problems in terms of electricity production, continuous rolling blackouts. It's a huge, complex issue. And this student was undertaking with their operations assignment to propose a solution to all of this, to the country's problems that have been plaguing for years, perhaps decades. This is what he was aiming to do. And incredibly admirable. I mean, I absolutely love the enthusiasm, but it's a great example of how you got to remember that, as Dr. E said, like, this is an institution. They're just expecting you to demonstrate understanding of the necessary material and to apply that understanding to a specific problem. So it's not about trying to create, complete breakthroughs and massive change in the world. Focus on that which is being assessed in the assessment criteria, and you're just going to take a whole lot of pressure off of yourself. And as a result, you'll operate better. When you take all that stress and all the weight of the world off of your shoulders, you're just going to think better, you're going to write better, and you're going to end up with a better piece of work.
I got you. Exactly that, which ironically might end up changing the world. See how that works? I'm kidding. I'm kidding. You're right in what you're saying. We'll aim a little lower. Eventually you get to the right place. I'm with you, man.
All right, so let's jump into the second reason that your dissertation or thesis is not as big as you might think. And that is that your dissertation doesn't define your career, at least not to the extent that you might think. Dr. E, what is this relationship between dissertations and careers? What do students need to understand? How can we put this all in perspective?
All right, let me tell you what the students need to understand. This is for all of y'all out here. Listen to me. This is for everybody. Gather around, okay? Gather around. Stand around here because we need to figure this out, okay? For all your affirmations and manifestations and I know my worth type BS, everybody's talking nowadays. Everybody's saying all this stuff. You guys don't half set your sights way too low. Like way too low. For somebody who just said a minute ago that the important thing is for you to set your sights in the right place, you set your sights far too low for what this really is, which is to say this belief, this conviction that your dissertation, that your thesis or your PhD or your master's degree is going to be the greatest piece of work you've ever produced and the most important thing that's going to happen in the course of your career is so short-sighted. Like, it's so far from what is actually the case. This is by a long distance, going to be the worst piece of work you ever produce in the course of your life. And it should be that way. No, I'm being serious. It should be that way. I'm not saying that you want to aim for it to be the worst piece of work you've ever produced. Let's be absolutely clear about something. This is going to be the best piece of work you produced up until now. That's certainly true. Up until now, you've produced previous degrees or theses that weren't of the same standard of this one. The requirements weren't on the same scale. So you did your bachelor's degree and now you're doing your master's degree, or you did high school, now you're in college, or you did your master's and now you're doing your PhD. Like, whatever it is, ultimately, of course, you're stepping up with every single degree that you go into, and every single piece of work that you produce is supposed to be better than the last one. But that's the lesson. Every work you produce is supposed to be better than the last one. So unless your intention is to stop producing anything after you finish this is going to be the least of it. The hope is that this acts as a platform for you to go on and produce more work going forward for the rest of your career and everything else that you do. I mean, all of these goals and aims and ambitions of maybe one day changing the world as a consequence of your dissertation or as a consequence of your thesis or your studies, I mean, surely that should carry through for the rest of your career. And if that's the case, this is literally going to be the worst thing you've ever written. Whatever you write after this should be a lot better. So this is what I mean by setting your goals in the right place, setting your sights in the right place. There's a general rule. As a general rule, and I say this to people all the time, look up. And I mean that. Like, I know it sounds literal, and I do mean it in the kind of literal sense, in the sense of what I mean by is setting your sights on the right peak. So not just the one that you happen to be climbing at the moment, or not just the mountain that you happen to be overcoming today, or not just the path that you happen to be walking here and now, but one would hope that you have learned enough and you have been walking for long enough to understand that the peaks and the troughs that you go through or you travel through today are just preparation for the greater ones that you have to go through tomorrow. This is practice and preparation for the greater peaks that you will overcome next week and next month and next year and the year after that. This is the start of a much, 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 much longer journey that hopefully will be much, much, much more successful than whatever this was. So set your sights in the right place and press on. This is the least of what you're going to achieve.
I think something that I always remind myself of, and this applies as much to a dissertation or a thesis as to any creative act in life. Something I always remind myself of is that you should be looking at your past work and cringing a little bit. Like, that's a good sign. And so, we look at any creative act. Let's take this podcast, for example, Dr. E. I mean, yeah, we can open up. Like, we are the first to recognize that hopefully each podcast that we shoot is a little bit better than the last one. And what that means by extension is that if we go back a few podcasts, those are really, really cringeworthy. And so that's just a useful perspective to have. If you're not cringing at the stuff that you made in the past, it means that you're not progressing, that you're not improving. And you have to take that same perspective here and put it in perspective that if you're planning to be a career researcher, if you're planning to do a PhD, or if this is for your PhD and you're then planning to get into the academic research world, this is going to be your worst piece of work because it's your starting point. It's the first piece of really rigorous research that you did, and it's not going to be that fantastic, and that's okay. It doesn't define your career. Now, of course, it might shape your career in terms of the research focus that you take. If you're going to become a professional researcher, it's going to define your little niche potentially. Doesn't mean that you can't change from there. But the actual dissertation itself, whether it was absolutely groundbreaking or not, it's inconsequential. And that's if you're going down the route of academia as a career path, which most students aren't. If you're just doing a master's degree, and let's say you're doing an MBA and you're doing a dissertation, chances are any future employers won't even ask about your dissertation. It's nice if they do, and you might want to play to your strengths in the future. If you are presenting yourself as a specialist in topic XYZ and you did your dissertation or thesis on that, then of course you can raise it. But there are very, very, very few employers in the non-academic workplace who are going to take the time to read through a 100-page document. And so it's just useful to keep that perspective that you just because you didn't get some amazing result in your dissertation, that does not mean that this now has some massive knock-on effect on your career. So again, take the weight off your shoulders and just understand that this is step one. This is step one of potentially a research career, or just step one in terms of an area of specialization for the rest of your career.
All right. So let me just say this. I mean, I feel a little bit triggered by the whole, our podcasts have gotten better over time, just for the audience's benefit. If I ain't here next week, I feel like this is, this was like a little shot in the dark. Like, we can get this better over time and get rid of Baldy over here. Like, hey, this is not what's going to happen, okay? That's number one. Number two, in terms of the people not reading your thesis, you're 1,000% right. I mean, I don't even think you've read my thesis. I mean, I know a bunch of people I work with.
I couldn't understand it, man.
That was the point. There's a scene in the Batman movie where he says, like, he had to explain something and he explains it in a really complicated fashion. And he says, I had to do that just so you knew how hard it was. Yeah, it's the same thing. The title of my book is set in such a way as it was 8 years it took for me to get there. That's the only reason it's so complicated. But look, let me make a kind of an additional point, or a kind of, I guess, a broader point related to what you're saying. And I agree with you, generally speaking, in terms of what we're talking about with respect to progress and getting better over time. But it reminds me of this critique that Martin Heidegger, one of the philosophers that I wrote about in my book. Yeah, that book. Yeah, that no one's reading. But it reminds me of something he said. And I completely wholeheartedly agree with him, right? It's not... He says there's a common, and I was doing philosophy at the time for my PhD, but the common rejoinder against philosophy, the common criticism of philosophy is that you can't do anything with it. And he says that the correct response to this is that they're absolutely correct. There's not much you can do with a philosophy degree, but you're missing the point. It's not a question of what you can do with philosophy. It's a question of what philosophy does to you. And in that respect, and watch the comeback now, it's the same thing with this podcast. It ain't about what you could do with this podcast. It's about what this podcast does to you, homie. Like,
All right, so that brings us to our third point, reason number 3, why you don't need to sweat over your dissertation. And that is that, quite simply, the skills and the virtues that you develop along the way through this dissertation process are the real prize here. It's not the dissertation, it's not the research that you do, it's the skills and the virtues that you develop along the way. Dr. E, what are these skills? What are these virtues? Why are these things so valuable for the road ahead of someone?
All right. So for all of those who made it here this far, all good things do come to those who wait. And if you're still listening, here's the philosophical gem. All right, here's really what it is. And you can go and tell your friends, the ones who didn't listen to the podcast for the last 10 minutes, they need to, because you know all the gems are buried at the end. But still, here's the philosophical gem. And this is the important thing that you need to remember. All achievements, and I mean all achievements, like all failures in life, will one day persist only by virtue of the memory maintained almost exclusively by you. But the character that you acquire in arriving at that achievement will endure though your memory fails. See how suddenly it got really deep? You see, I need one of these. I think we need one of those like silent moments. Like we need one of those. Like I need to light some incense or something right now. Like, one of those moments. But it's true. What I'm saying is that the achievements that you get to, whether it's your PhD, your master's degree, your bachelor's degree, whatever else it is in life, the job that you managed to acquire after your PhD or after your master's degree, the success that you achieved in that job, the amazing podcast that you created last week and the even better one that you created this week. What, Eric? What? Yeah, exactly. But regardless, whatever achievements you managed to pull off throughout the course of your life, after a long enough period of time, these are the things that are maintained only by your own memories. That you think of these achievements, these trophies of yours. I feel like there should be a Drake song in the background. But these trophies of yours are only trophies for yourself. You're the only one that maintains them. And the same thing is true with your own failures. I didn't achieve what I wanted to achieve with my PhD, or I didn't achieve what I wanted to achieve with my master's or my bachelor's or beyond that, or my career path or what have you. These are only really losses that are maintained in your head. The difference is that regardless of your achievements, your losses, your trophies or your failures, your merits or demerits, regardless of any of those, the character that you develop along the course of that journey stays with you forever. That's the thing that really counts. So it's not a question of whether or not my PhD was the greatest piece of work I've ever produced. It's a question of who I became as a consequence of the work I put in during that PhD. And that was exactly my experience. It's exactly the experience of everybody else that I've worked with. It's exactly the experience of everybody else that we've taught or we've spoken to, of some of our students and some of our clients. It's precisely that. It's what, like I said a moment ago, it's not what you do with it, it's what it does to you in the course of that process, who you become as a consequence of it. It's about endurance over patience. It's about discipline over motivation. It's work on work on work. I mean, hey, listen, we've gone through Michel Foucault and Martin Heidegger. I feel like it's time for the Buddha, right? And the Buddha himself says, before enlightenment, you chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, you chop wood, carry water. Nothing changes. The goal is that if you set your sights correctly, your victories and your successes are a byproduct of the actions and the commitments that you already carry with you. That's the goal. That's what you're trying to achieve. It's making sure that you acquire the tools to ensure success as opposed to feeding the thirst for success.
I've got a feeling that some people are sitting here feeling like, wise, but what's he talking about? What are these skills? What are these virtues? So let's dig into it. What are the skills that you're picking up? You're picking up how to think critically. You're developing your skill to write, to communicate, to present if you have to present a defense of any sort, to make an argument, to just get down and do the work. And I guess that spills into the virtue side. As Dr. E said, if there's one indicator that someone has the ability to sit down and do the work over and over and over and to endure, it is certainly that they have done a PhD, because in so many ways, that's what it's all about. And so those are some of the skills and virtues that come to mind straight away. Dr. E, what am I missing? What else are students, what else is being done to them by the dissertation process? What else do they get to walk away with as like little free gifts from this process, apart from a little certificate to put on the wall.
I mean, knowing how to handle a bunch of suffering is one of those. That's a big deal. Makes a big difference. I mean, it sounds like I'm joking, but it's kind of important. But besides that, there's a bunch of little things that you almost barely even notice in the course of completing your PhD or your master's degree, whatever it might happen to be. You almost don't notice these things, but they make an enormous difference. So, for example, the ability to be able to maintain focus and prioritize, that's a massive thing. So the ability to be able to identify the things of greatest importance versus the things of lesser importance. So you're not wasting your energy in areas that just don't require your attention or require less of your attention. I can't tell you the difference that makes just in everyday life, just in functioning in every single day life, like knowing where my focus should be versus knowing where my focus shouldn't be, knowing what pays me and what doesn't pay me, knowing what things benefit me or benefit the work that I'm doing versus the things that don't. Just having your focus in the right place makes a massive difference. Then there's a question of being able to endure. And when I say endure, I don't mean it as kind of like a wishy-washy skill. I mean it as a practicable thing. I can't tell you how much it annoys me that people focus on patience. It's not patience. And we've said this before. It's the ability to be able to endure, because patience implies waiting for an end. And that's not what this is. It's the endurance of being able to kind of grind away at a thing. So whether you're finishing your PhD or you finished it, and now you're in your career, and your career is academic or otherwise, whatever it is that you're doing is going to require a degree of endurance. You're going to have to press through a number of struggles. You're going to have to press through a number of challenges. You're going to have to press through a number of difficulties. And in doing these things, you should be able to maintain your focus and not find yourself disturbed or not find yourself shaken off of what it is that you're trying to achieve, or not find yourself so easily moved off of your focus. But you can maintain that laser guided focus because you know how to endure these things. I mean, this is one of those skills that are critically important. And then the last one that I'll mention here is the ability precisely to be able to stay calm under pressure. And that happens, I mean, that's what you're doing the whole way through your degree. All it is pressure, particularly if you're paying for it, particularly if you're paying for it and you're a single parent, or particularly if you're paying for it and you've got 3 or 4 other jobs. I'm saying this because I'm speaking from experience and I'm a little bit triggered. But look, over the course of my PhD, I had 4 jobs. Yeah, that's right, 4. Yeah. So for all of you, I was thinking it was like your degrees are hard out here. Yeah, 4 of them. But look, if we're being really, really open and honest, let's be really open and honest. My personal life was going through a whole bunch of tumultuous issues during the course of my PhD. I mean, it was a horribly difficult period of time for me to go through while trying to finish one of the most difficult degrees I ever took on, while I was dealing with difficult supervisors, while I was dealing with the cost of living and the cost of life, generally speaking, working those 4 jobs. I had a younger brother to look after. I had family that was going crazy. All of these things were happening at the same time. And you could, and I did, don't get me wrong, you could look at these things and think, woe is me. Why do I have to suffer to such a degree? And why is the world so difficult? But you're missing the trick. I've said this 1,000 times. In fact, let's put it like this. I said it to my PhD supervisor, which is to say this. I felt as though they were making my journey as difficult as humanly possible. And to some degree or another, they were. I hope they can see this because, I remember you, homie. What's up? But they were. But the point is that what I told them is true. It was true then and it's true today. All of the sticks and stones and the bullets that you keep firing at me, so long as I endure, and that's the only thing that's required of me, the thing that comes out of the other side is an academic beast. It's a different thing. Because what that means is not only have I been able to put up with all of this stuff, but now I know how to. Now I know exactly what it takes for you to be able to take the shots, to take the bullets, to take the struggles, to take the difficulties, keep pressing and still succeed. That's what you're looking for. What you don't want is like untouched success. It's just no scars, no dirt and no stains on you. What you want is to have a little bit of dirt that you can brush off your shoulder and feel like you actually made it. That's the success. That's the goal. That's the trophy. It's not your ability to be able to just get the PhD without you feeling like you were ever touched in the process. It's your ability to be able to fall over, stand up, get kicked in the head and keep going. That is what makes the difference. And that is one of the skills that you really want.
You mentioned that you come out of it as an academic beast, but I think I guess the point we're trying to make here is that it's broader than that. You actually just come out as beast, full stop. Right? These are skills, these are virtues, these are traits that are incredibly useful throughout life, whether you're going to go the academic route or you're going to go any other route. You are going to have to learn to deal with difficulty. You are going to have to learn to communicate very clearly. You are going to have to learn to manage conflict and have constructive disagreements, if we can put it that way. And so these are all skills that are fantastic. That the PhD journey or just the dissertation journey more broadly It's an opportunity to really hone in on these and improve these in a relatively safe environment as opposed to doing it in, say, the workplace. So it really is an experience that pays dividends far greater than just the piece of paper that you get at the end of it.
Absolute facts. And if that's all you were getting this degree for, if the only aim was for you to get that piece of paper at the end, you're missing the point. You're not letting it do to you what it's supposed to. You're not understanding the effect that it's going to have on you. And if all you're watching this podcast for is to get to the end of it, I mean, congratulations, you made it, but you're missing all the tricks, man. You got to concentrate. It ain't what you do with it. It's what it does to you. I'm just saying.
Dr. E, as always, it's been enlightening. I love that we are managing to maintain a diversity of philosophical comments and quotes and bits and pieces from east to west. I'm sure, or I hope, that students have got a lot of value from this. So thank you again for your time, Dr. E.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. You know exactly where to find me. I'll be right here next week for another podcast.
All right, so that wraps up this episode of the Grad Coach podcast. Remember, you can grab a free copy of our tried and tested dissertation template, as well as loads of other free resources over on the Grad Coach blog. You can find the link to that and everything else in the description. If you got value from this video, please do remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons, and you'll definitely want to check out this video next. I'll see you there.